I think that was me, sorry. I'm an academic, I can't help it.
A sentence A key aim of the work is to propose approaches for creating legible environments when urban spaces experience new technologies. So, without any further ado, Katherine, over to you.
So you'll be pleased to hear this is the Katherine session. So I'm Katherine number 2. I don't know if I can follow first Katherine. And yeah, I am an academic. I mean, I've done a lot of work with industry and working with software and tech before, but my training is in architecture, so I'm not a solutions architect. I'm an architect by training. Although, as we talk about the sort of smart cities field, my view, having worked with sort of tech for the last sort of 20 years, tech and space, is that whether we need buildings, whether we need the sort of spaces we have now, so I'm not a bricks and mortar architect. So I'm going to talk to you today about smart urban futures. This is a sort of area of work that I've worked in for quite a while now, going from digital, moving to smart, and thinking about what the future of sort of the spaces around us are really. So it says urban, but this could be non-urban, or it could be it could work out to the countryside too. But it's rethinking some of the sort of ways we live and behave in spaces and how technology changes that. So if any of you have sort of designed software or worked with technology, the sort of bit where it all goes wrong, where people don't behave as they're supposed to, or it doesn't fit, or no one turns up, that's often spatial, or it's often about how people behave in space. And I think my sort of feeling is understanding that and knowing how it works is part of really designing for good. The mix of tech and the spatial is a really important thing. So I don't know if people have heard of smart cities. Smart cities is a bit of a catch-all word. It was sort of invented by IBM to sell stuff to big cities. So really, smart cities is whatever you want it to be, but it's basically a set of technologies embedded in the urban space, going from the basics of Wi-Fi, particularly IoT, so Internet of Things, lots of data, increasingly AI, and going through things like e-cars. We sort of cover things like fabrication, energy use. It can go up to the scale of the infrastructure, so you can have smart grids, which are basically sort of these networks where the energy use in between the buildings and the built space is caught in one space. And then Internet of Things again, which is both infrastructural. There's a whole set of IoT sensors out there that are sort of monitoring what's happening, but they're also there's one small thing in a place. So the platforms in which we see smart cities are really important. So how we view those data, how data is viewed as well, is part of what smart cities are. But smart cities is a whole suite of technologies covering pretty much every aspect of how we live, and particularly looking at sensors, Wi-Fi and data, and increasingly intelligent data. So one of the other ways in which people talk about smart cities is this idea of sentience. So you've got sensors which sense, and you've got a city which can sense, is sentient, so it thinks, it's got some idea that it maybe thinks for itself. So this is smart city of the future. Imagine life for the citizen of the smart city. You awake in your sustainably built home and take your morning shower in recycled industrial wastewater, cost efficiently heated overnight. Eating breakfast, you scan the flat screen, fed by maximum bandwidth internet, where the special easy-click local neighbourhood menu allows you to compare your daily energy use with other houses in the area. Confirm your webcam appointment with your doctor, top up the balance of your all-purpose travel card, order, it's American, this quote, order your groceries and leave messages for your child's teacher. Outside, your electric car is waiting. On the edge of a central congestion zone, you park in a charging area and pay with your travel card. Get into a 3-wheeled utility vehicle, which, via a network of special lanes and sensor-controlled pedestrianised areas, delivers you to another parking dock at your workplace. So that's either horrifying or great, depending on what you think. But that level of seamless connectivity and integration of different services, so you've got cars, you've got services like shopping delivery, you've got even down to the school communication through your social media platform. It's all working together. So this sort of integration of tech, often sensor-based, but also, you've got an infrastructure there, you've got to have a lot of e-charging points to have the e-cars, is sort of an idea of what a smart city might be. And the other thing to know about smart cities is there aren't any that exist as yet. There is no city that has done this magic transformation into the all-encompassing smart city. There's bits of stuff here and bits of stuff there, but we're still in sort of smart city 1.0, I think, and there's still a lot to come. Plymouth's a good example. There's quite a lot of aspiration around how they use tech in the city. Can you see it on the ground? Maybe you've tapped your card on the bus, but where else? We're still very much at the beginnings of this. So smart city is defined by city systems that are connected through information and data. Part of it is how we actually understand cities. We used to have cities that are sort of, we planned them, we lived in them, and then we sort of thought about how that was and redesigned. The idea now is that we can sort of design on the fly. They sort of start to reshift. How we live, work-life balance changes. Can we work, study? Everything starts to become mixed together a little bit more, and how we change the spaces. And then part of that is new digital services and interfaces. So if you are from the tech space and you haven't heard of smart cities, there is potentially a whole sort of set of ways in which you think about your technology in a more outside the box, outside the screen, how it comes out into the space around you, whether it's the built space or the city space. So there's types of ways we think about it. Urban data in all sorts of senses. So data that's there at the moment, it can be analog data. There's a lot of, we've always had data in cities, it's just what we do with it. But increasingly that's digital data, and increasingly that's gathered not necessarily through any particular action. It's not intentionally gathered, it's constantly being sourced. IoT, that's a key sort of basis of smart cities. Artificial intelligence. And then in terms of how you sort of visualise AR and VR, so some of the ways we think about smart cities is how we visualise or simulate cities to sort of see how they might behave. So just to give you an example of where some cities have done smart, and like I said, there isn't a formula, there is ways of doing things, and to some extent it's being built on the fly. So London's done quite a lot of work, particularly around transport. So the whole TfL network, it's sort of made open all its data in the transport network, and let people play with it. So if you ever use City Mapper, that's a sort of trying to that's putting it out to software companies to work with the data. But they've also got this dashboard, and I heard from the people that made this that Boris used to have this in the mayor's office and used to think it was great. But so this is the aggregation of all the different. So you've got transport, you've got weather, you've got webcams, you've got the stock market, you've got where the bikes are, pollution. So it's starting to sort of see all these things together, and once you start to see, the tube network goes down, the pollution goes up because some people are getting in their cars. So it's this idea that it's all connected. Amsterdam's taken a slightly different approach. They've gone really citizen-centric and made it, everyone's making their own little smart city in their neighbourhood. And they introduced this smart citizen kit, which is a Arduino, so IoT, but sort of very hackable, which measures pollution and sort of any sort of sensor data at a local level. They gave those out to a whole lot of people and asked them to sort of see how they manage their neighbourhood differently. That's just one example. So Amsterdam's done a lot of these very much sort of, letting people, citizen science type projects. Copenhagen, I've just picked, this is actually a project by a group from MIT Sensible City Lab. And this is, I'm not sure this is actually up and running, but this is a sort of view for how you might start to put data into the city. So you've got this bike, which has got the red wheel, basically gathers data as it travels around the city. So you're sort of crowdsourcing pollution data or traffic data and seeing how people are moving around. So both you're a data, much like we create data in Facebook, this is sort of creating your own data about the city as you cycle around, and you can view it and then you share it, and then that aggregated sort of crowdsourced data starts to be a whole sort of view of pollution levels, traffic congestion and road. And of course, traditionally we've had data about traffic, we've had data about pollution. Put them together, you understand where the magic happens and how you might solve it and how you make behaviour change. Barcelona's been a smart city. They actually took a whole area in post-industrial city and sort of turned it into what they call 22 at, which was they lifted the road up and put a whole load of cabling in to make the whole change the way the city happens. But they put in a whole lot of infrastructure around sensors in bins, sensors in parking spots, lots of bicycle sharing as well. So it's a real IoT sort of city, and again making that available. So some of these cities do this to make it available back to the sort of vendors to sort of understand how they make their products, but also to basically manage the city differently. So you've got the city council can start to go, right, we know where the garbage is. We don't have a timetable for sending out our rubbish trucks. We do that on the fly. So it does mean a really different way about managing a city, and people are much more involved. So here in the university, we've been sort of working on smart cities and doing research around it for a while. And one of the things we identified is that there is nobody out there designing the cities that are smart. There's a lot of people creating services and tech, but the city itself, no one's designing it. And we really think there's a need to have people who are able to design the IoT or the AI data platform, but think about it in the city sense. So how can you design it for the city and actually think about how you design the space? You know, how might we redesign Plymouth City Centre if we've got IoT sensors all around it? Is it just the same with lots of sensors in? We think no, we think it needs to be, we need to sort of think about how we integrate them together. So this is the futures bit. What might this future look like? I've got some questions about what might happen. So what happens when sensors can be integrated into everyday objects, things and environments? So when we've got the space, sensing what's going on and sort of deciding how we can interact with it, can we change behaviour around climate change, for example? If we knew that pollution in the street where we live based on the low-cost sensors, like the citizen sensing kit from Amsterdam, might we decide not to take the car to work but the bike instead? And if we knew how our neighbour was cycling to work, might we join them? So this is this sort of, you know, you can move it to a whole sort of sharing platform because data enables you to understand other people. So this was just an example where I've got a series of prototype projects that we've developed here just to sort of showcase what this might look like. And this was developed together with One Polygon, who I think are around somewhere. But so this is a plant. It's got sensors, really low-cost sensors, £2, IoT sensors, humidity, air quality, moisture, and air temperature in the plant pot. And you put the app in front. You basically run your tablet in front of it, and you can view that data live. So this is just sort of saying, well, we can see the data around us, because a lot of the time we have data, but it's somewhere like in a box, you know, in a screen, in a tablet. How can we, using the AR, just to sort of open it up and make it live? So that's all live data feeds. So we did this. We showed this at an event at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And those CO2 levels kept going up and up and up. And like, it really works. This is not great. We've got too many people in the space. They're using up too much air. The plant's going to die. Although, unfortunately, they wouldn't let us take a live planting because it was a museum, so it's not going to die. It was alive. It was still. But it works with real plants. So another question. What would it? And this is maybe links a little bit to Katharine's talk before. Is, you know, we're so social media driven, and social media is all about emotions. And being an architect, actually, when we design spaces to give you feelings about the space. But how could we, you know, we want people to be surprised or in awe or be serious, you know, hopefully in this sort of space you might feel like you're going to be serious. But how do we make that happen? How do we link all that social media, which is all that emotional stuff, with the physical space? And this is the idea that the city starts to be able to know stuff, not just the people. So the Watson. Okay, we know about sentiment. When we have location linked to that? So, for example, we analyse a tweet, and the tweet's got location. We start to know where spaces are happy or spaces are getting annoyed. So this great thing about urban data is it can be personalised. It starts to make sense and be relevant to everyday lives. So how old we are, what rubbish we throw away, how far we travel to work. It also means that our feelings and social networks become part of the fabric of the city. So at the moment, if people are tweeting in this and they're either happy or sad or go, oh, she's just so boring, I hope this is finished. That's all, I can't see that, it's not in the space. You know, it'd be quite cool if the space started to go, right, time to finish, Katherine, you know, you've gone on, it all started to get. So this is this idea, we created a project, a sort of prototype here of the emotional bench. So the bench is basically a set of LEDs. We just set up a random Twitter feed And the Twitter feed basically runs through Watson runs on the Twitter feed, so you tweet how you're feeling. And we did this as a demo, but to be honest, we could use any Twitter feed. We just did it so you could see your tweets and the impact. So you tweet to the Twitter account, the demo runs through Watson, Node Red, and the bench changes colour depending on the sentiment in your tweet. And the idea with this is, when you can link those sort of social media feeds and the social listening that Katherine was talking about to the fabric of the city, does your bus come more quickly if you start to get angry at the bus stop? Because that's what you can do with smart city transport, is you can make it real time, you can make it responsive. So thinking about, at the moment those things are in two different places. We've got our social media locked in and we've got the city, but actually, just as we saw the social listening, if the city could listen, what would it do? And then this idea of the sort of augmented is quite important as well, because it's this mixing of the physical and the digital. So what if we could view the data that we have about the city or laid over it or augmented? So we've got lots of, so there's data being created. So in this room's run by a building management system, and there's tons of data. None of it is accessible, none of it's open source, and it's not being used by anyone apart from experts. But when we free up that data, make it open data, make it accessible, make it available to others, that starts to be useful. I mean, to some extent, Pokemon Go was a little bit of a test of what augmented reality is. Interestingly, they used existing data sets, so they just hacked an existing they bought an existing data set and used that as the base for all the places. And you had this weird thing happening where Pokestops were actually places that they hadn't really expected, like 50 people to turn up on their doorstep. So when you get this mixing of the digital, where everyone's playing, and the real world, strange things can happen. Places get really popular, or people go to places they've not been before because they don't. So again, what happens if Fortnite, and increasingly you'll get the gaming model where something like Fortnite, which is exploring a space, starts to become, you do that through AR in the real space, and you're not quite, so crossing roads can be tricky if you're in the middle of fighting off someone about to die, but that's the question. So rather than going online for local weather, we look through the phone to see rain clouds heading towards us, or see where sunny spots are. So it's all about data being location specific and being around us. The smart city can do that. So to test this out, this is part of a project we've been doing with smart cities, looking at how people can interact with them more easily. Again, working with One Polygon, we basically wanted to create an open data app that was accessible to other people. So the city's been doing this really great project called Data Play, which is basically making an open data portal. So we just took any of the open data that was location specific, that had a Latin long, and created an AR app. So you basically hold the app up and you can sort of see the data around you. And we did it by category, so you can look at all the transport data around you, and you can sort of look at the transport data and the health data and see if there's a link between the two. At the moment, it's just a demo. I mean, it's a working demo, but we haven't created data sets for it. We're just working with the existing ones. But we created an open source backend, so it's just got a simple web server where you can put your data in. You need lat long and a category, and then it will show it up. So the idea is that people could use this, for example, in planning decisions. Okay, we want to look at the green space data around here where they're going to build a car park and figure out if we actually really think that car park should be there. So viewing data where it actually is can help you understand, again, the link between the city and the space itself. So yeah, we've got that up and running if anyone wants to have a look at that. Another thing is wearables. So we've talked about health data and health being one of the key things, but that sort of data is again, once you start linking it to where you are and the sort of smart city and the sensors, you get some really interesting things happening. So what if our wearables enabled a crowdsourced analysis of the way we use the city in real time? Particularly good, say, if you've got kids running around and you want not that we should be observing them, but if you can start to aggregate those sorts of behaviours, you can start to understand maybe stress levels, etc. So by crowdsourcing data live, you possibly make much more informed decisions. So this is a project that's been developed by a couple of students here, where we're using something called GSR, which is galvanic skin response, which is basically measures how sweaty you are, which is great because how sweaty you are is also how stressed you are. And obviously some people get really sweaty, that doesn't mean they're stressed, it's all relative to individuals. But what we've done is try to make this as a sort of data audits based on emotions, not based on... So a city generally, there's buildings, you might say there's 50 buildings here and there's 100 cars running on the road. But how do people feel about that and how does that link to the space? So we basically, the student wired up people with a GSR device, and we got them to take a walk through the city. So if you don't know Plymouth, it's the Hoe, which is a nice green space. Walk through the city centre, it gets busier. You get to necessarily come up through the university where we are now and back onto the road behind us there, which is quite busy and a bit chaotic. And so as you go along, the stress levels rise. So the orange is much more stressful, and the peaks are stress peaks. So what we're able to do is link the way people feel about the city, where they're stressed about it, and the physical features of the environment. So really useful, because how do we make this data useful to, like, for example, this is useful for urban planners. How can we start to make them understand, if you redesign this traffic junction, you've really got to think about that one particularly, because everyone's really not enjoying walking around there. So that sort of level of fine-grainedness has been quite handy. And actually we're doing this now. We found this quite useful working. We got approached by Tate St Ives, and they want to make their gallery spaces more inclusive. And a lot of people who have social anxiety or are on the autism spectrum really have difficulty with public spaces. So we've been using this to look at actually measuring sort of scientifically, but getting real data about how people are responding to a gallery space and how we might then redesign it. So we've got a whole load of redesign decisions based on that they're going to take on board. The final one I'm going to talk about is shared data. So this idea of crowdsourcing, but this is also linked back to how we run cities. So we've got the idea that City Council, for example, they may take on a lot of smart city initiatives, but who's responsible for it? Is it the tech provider? Is it the city? Who's managing things? So part of this is thinking about how you link that all up and link it back to people. So this was a project we worked a little bit on with Design for Social Change and Amy and the city, called Smarter Streets. It was a Innovate funded sort of pilot project, and the idea was to enable people to comment on issues in the street space, and those comments would be a little bit like a mini social platform, and then that was linked back to Amy itself, who was at that point the highways provider, so they were viewing comments about issues in the street space, responding to them. So, because one of the things the City Council, the big issues the City Council has, is people complaining about potholes, graffiti, dog poo, antisocial behaviour. So generally they're spending a lot of their time dealing with all these, what might be seen as petty, but to people who complain about them, really important. And trying to make this back into a much more sort of social feedback loop, and people taking responsibility for their own space. So, the potholes there, we complain and wait, and then nothing happens, we don't know what's happening. So this was sort of creating a sort of feedback loop, and you take a picture of the issue in your street, you post it to the app would then go straight to Amy, and then they would comment and act on it straight away, and then feed back to the local person to explain what had happened, and people could vote on whether they felt that was an important thing to fix. The interesting thing about this is quite a lot of people started to comment on things that couldn't be fixed or were actually ideas. They were like, well, what if this space, we could have a park in this space? And like Amy's going, no, nobody just said we're not responsible for parks. We don't do that. So actually this is a really interesting one to look at. Okay, well, if people want to change a space, they might want to change it into something that isn't anticipated as a new service, and how do you bring that out? So that was the back end of the report management that Amy would see and had to respond to. So for them, there was less of a complaint. No, don't know who it's from. People ring a number in the City Council. It was much more about this sort of open feedback loop and people being much more participatory. Finally, just to talk, so I think coming back to the first talk of the day about thinking about ethics, there are big issues with ethics, specifically when you get into AI and data and who owns the data, and if that data is useful, it may be because it's still got information that's linked to the person. And there's a whole range of issues, but for example, in America they started to use predictive policing, where you're profiled for your behaviour in public space based on your movement patterns, and you're a criminal before you've even been a criminal, because they know what a criminal looked like. And of course, you're often not a criminal because you might walk like a criminal, but you're not actually doing it that day. So this, and you may laugh, but people are getting picked up for this. So, really, it's the prediction of data and knowing stuff is tricky. I won't talk about that, but this is how you can fool facial recognition systems, so we can do it creatively. I want to have a haircut like that. So there's some smart projects in Plymouth, a whole range of projects, energy, data play we mentioned. It's coming along. Plymouth's putting together a digital roadmap. Crowdfunding's been really useful for doing small projects. And we've got these new programs as well, where we're trying to basically recognising that we've got tech capacity, we've got city capacity, and they're not working together. People don't know how to design smart cities. There isn't a course you can go on to learn to do it. You can learn to do data, you can learn to design, and also in terms of innovation as well, sort of 3D fabrication and those sorts of Fab Lab type options are not there. So that's two new courses we're running, where we've got this lab approach where we take those challenges from the smart city, bring them in, and you can work on them in the space together. So ideally you come out of it with a job. So I shall finish there, and thank you. Look forward to your questions if you have them. Thank you.